Okay, and welcome to one of our author talks for the Big Family Digital Book Festival in Scarborough Southwood Gardens. Today we have Linda Jones with us, who is a fantastic children's author of 4 books. Hello, Linda, lovely to see you. Linda's going to just start by introducing a bit about herself and reading an extract from one of her stories. So over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Hello, Gemma. Thank you so much for asking me along. It's such a shame I can't be in the beautiful town of Scarborough, or is it a city? Are you officially a
town?
But never mind, these things happen. I'm very happy to be here. I've been writing books for about 7-8 years, and I'm fortunate enough to have 4 children's books now out on Amazon. And I'm really lucky that I can read an extract for you today. The books I enjoy, I suppose, writing the most are the fantasy ones, the magical fantasy. And that's what I'll be reading and talking about today, the younger ones. And they're aimed for youngsters between the ages of 7 and 10. But I've been writing since I was very young. I didn't learn to read properly until I was about 10. I had a learning difficulty, but had some amazing teachers. I was very fortunate. And as soon as I did learn to read and write, which obviously go together, I didn't stop. And I've always told stories, always. My children got sick of them, I think. And then, unfortunately, as an adult, I became poorly. I was a nurse for quite a long time and then had to give that up. So to stop myself becoming completely bored and just fed up, I decided I'd try to start writing stories out. And here I am a few years later with the books published. So anybody can write, it's just about practicing. And I would encourage anybody at any age to put pen to paper or fingers on a keyboard, because I use a keyboard to write. Lots of people don't, but I do, because I'm not a very good speller and my grammar's not great. Again, it's part of the learning difficulty that I have. However, technology being what it is, it really, really helps. So there are no excuses. So if anybody's got dyslexia or any other learning problems, trust me, technology helps.
Wonderful advice, thank you. I have to say, I'm dyslexic, and I was also a late learner to reading, and absolutely, it's not a barrier. It doesn't need to be a barrier, and reading is one of my greatest pleasures, and I'm so glad that I did learn. And yeah, thank you for sharing that with us.
That's a pleasure.
If you'd like to share your extract, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to read from the very first book of the series is called Oozing Magic, and this is the first book in the series. Can you see that, Gemma?
Oh, we've just lost you slightly. Yes, now we can. Yes. Oh, no, lost it again.
Okay.
There we are. Perfect.
You can find them on my website, but also on Amazon, where you can buy them. And this book is called Deadwood Hall. So it starts the adventure with Dylan and Emily. And I'm not reading the first chapter. I'm going to read from the end of the second and the third one. And it's not very long. So let me just set the scene. And it's winter, and it's midwinter, and it's been snowing. And Emily and Dylan are being allowed to stay up late, and they're upstairs in their grandfather's house, and it's a very old house, and outside it's bitterly cold. And they've been told to stay quiet, and they're all watching. They're sitting down upstairs. They're supposed to be watching films, but Dylan, who is about just coming up to 10, not behaving very well. So I'm just going to put my glasses on. Now, Dylan has been told he's not supposed to make catapults, but he's chosen otherwise. So now he's looking for missiles to put in his catapult. So here we go. Dylan pushed aside the ancient maps, carved pieces of bone, and some large model cars. He was looking for something to use. It was then he spotted the 3 small lead figures. "What are these doing here?" he whispered. "They're usually in Grandad's study." One was an old-fashioned soldier wearing a bright red uniform jacket. A gleaming sword hung at his side. Another wore green camouflage. Brown streaks coated his tiny cheeks. The last was dark-skinned, slim and very elegant. She had gold bracelets around her ankle and arm, and a sandy-coloured cloak that fell in ripples from her shoulders. They were all only about 3 inches high. "This one should be perfect," whispered Dylan, and picked up the model soldier. "Put it back, you're going to break it," warned Emily. But he wasn't listening. Not being a scaredy cat. At the first attempt, the soldier's sword got caught in the elastic. The model spun just once before falling onto his toe with a thump. "It serves you right," Emily laughed as he yelped and began hopping across the wooden floor. "I'll turn him around, then it'll work." More determined than ever, Dylan raised his hand, the elastic band drawn tightly between his fingers. In the distance, the church clock began to strike 11. The notes were crystal clear in the cold night air. "Honestly, Dylan, this is a really bad..." Before Emily could finish her sentence, the elastic had twanged. Over and over, the soldier spun faster and faster, heading straight towards the glass of the closed window. "No!" they cried out together. Then the strangest thing happened. With a swish, the window flew up. The soldier spun on and on out into the moonlit night. Chapter 3. A Stink in the Night. "Oh, now look what you've done," hissed Emily. "You are going to be in so much trouble." But that was magic," spluttered Dylan. "Rubbish. Dad was saying all the window catches are broken. Andy's going to be furious when he finds out what you did, as will Grandad. Those models are his favourite things." "I didn't know it was going to happen like that. I thought it would just fall out." "Never listen," yelled Emily, angry because she knew she'd get half the blame. "Like you never do anything wrong." They both heard shoes clumping up the stairs. "Oh, great! There's someone's on the way up. Quick!" Emily tugged down the window and grabbed her brother's hand to pull him to the floor. When the bedroom door opened, they were lying over cushions, innocently watching the television screen. "What were you arguing about?" asked their mother. "Only what film to watch," Dylan lied. He kept his brown eyes fixed on the flickering screen. "And where are your glasses?" she asked. With a groan, he reached over to pick the bedside cabinet and picked them up. "Sorry," he mumbled, fumbling them on. "I don't want to hear you again." She bent down to drop a kiss on Dylan's short, spiky hair and his sister's curly brown locks. Her own curly hair was caught up in a knot at the back of her head. A sparkling band of jewels kept it in place. "Yes, Mum," they chorused. "Staying up late is supposed to be a treat. Here, I brought you some cake and biscuits for a midnight feast." Dylan's eyes lit up. The biscuits were his favourite. They'd jam in the centre, which meant he could stick his tongue in and lick it out. "Don't get cold," his mother warned. She hurried away, the sparkles on her dress flashing like a galaxy of stars. "Oh, that was close," said Emily, turning off the film. "Thanks for not telling," mumbled Dylan. He walked over to the window. The sky was much darker now. The full moon was hardly visible at all. "We should be able to search for the soldier first thing in the morning before anyone finds out," said Emily. "No, we won't," Dylan groaned. "It's snowing really hard. He'll be all covered up and I'll never find him." "It'll serve you right if you miss out on the pantomime or something." But Emily had a horrible feeling it wouldn't just be her brother who would be in trouble. After all, she was supposed to be keeping an eye on him. "Well, I'm not going to be grounded for the rest of the holidays, so I suppose we'd better try and get him back tonight. But if I miss out on Sarah's party because of you..." "Really? You'll help?" Dylan beamed at her. "Like I could trust you to find it on your own, but no more catapult. You have to promise." She crossed her arms and frowned. "Promise," he said. They put on their socks, pulling them up over the bottom of their pyjamas. Keep your dressing gown on. We'll put on our coats over the top, Emily said. And where are your glasses? He'd taken them off again as soon as his mother had left the room. Reluctantly, Dylan did as she said. Picking up a couple of biscuits, he pushed them into his dressing gown pocket for later. There was a lot of noise from the party downstairs, so it was easy to slip along to the small rear staircase that no one ever used. As they crept down the narrow steps, Dylan ducked away from the dusty cobwebs dangling from the shadowy corners. He tried really hard not to think about what lived in the holes in the skirting boards and whether they had sharp teeth. Near the back door, their Wellington boots stood waiting. Their coats and Dylan's bobble hat hung from a peg, but their gloves were still too wet to wear. Here goes, whispered Emily, and unlocked the door. It's like walking out into a different world. Snow crunched under their boots. It sounded so much louder at night. Dylan pulled down his hat over his ears and took a long, deep breath. The air seemed to crackle in his lungs. It was so cold. Emily pointed to the left. If we go that way, we should be right under our bedroom. We can start searching from there. No one checks our room, whispered Dylan. He plunged his hands deep into his coat pockets. His fingers and toes were already tingling with the cold. They're too busy having a good time, said Emily. Wish our gloves had been dry. My hands are freezing. As soon as they were safely past the window, they began searching. The light streaming from the windows helped, but as they walked further into the garden, it became far more difficult to see anything clearly. Torch would have been useful, grumbled Dylan. Someone would have spotted the light, Emily whispered back. You look to the right and I'll look left. If we keep a few feet apart, we'll find him. They were almost up to the tree swing when they both heard a loud rustling. Emily spun around, her nose twitching. Can you smell that? She whispered, wrinkling her nose in disgust. Yuck! It really stinks. Must be a fox. Their droppings can smell pretty bad. Dylan pushed a cold hand inside to his dressing gown pocket, digging for one of his biscuits. What are you talking about? Muttered Emily. Well, that's what Grandad told me. Dylan took a bite of his biscuit, his teeth chattering in the cold, and pushed the rest into his coat pocket for later. Let's just get up to the pond, then we'll walk back and try again, said Emily. But I thought we'd have found him by now. By the time Dylan had reached the pond, he was beginning to feel desperate. At least the snow had stopped for now, and there was even a glimpse of moonlight. Without much hope, he turned to walk back towards the snow castle they'd made that afternoon. But his glasses had misted up, and he could hardly see a thing. He rubbed the lenses clear, and then let out a hoot of delight. Just a few yards away, something small and bright red was sticking out of a turret of the snow castle. Emily, I've found him. Dylan tried to hurry through the thick snow. It wasn't until he'd almost reached the castle that he realised his sister hadn't answered. Emily? He called again. He looked right and left and twisted all around. But his sister wasn't anywhere to be seen. And that's the end of chapter 3.
Ooh,
Hope you enjoyed that.
wonderful. I think to be continued, I think. That was incredible. Thank you. Lovely. Very good taste of things to come, I think. Thank you, Emily. That's brilliant. Just a little chat now, if you don't mind, about your writing, how you told a little bit about how you became a writer. It sounds really on your website, you've always been a big fan of fantasy. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I've always enjoyed fantasy. I'm from South Wales originally, born and brought up in Newport, and my school, although we didn't talk well, didn't speak in Welsh, we certainly learned a lot about dragons and the folklore of South Wales. So I grew up sort of surrounded by dragons and myth and goblins and such like, and always enjoyed that sort of fantasy. So I suppose writing about it was quite natural, really. And I love magic. And I've certainly enjoyed, you know, J.K. Rowling's books, and but my most favourite fantasy of all is Tolkien, is Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure lots of children might have heard about, or certainly will grow up to hear about.
Absolutely, absolutely classic. You also mentioned Ursula Le Guin as well, I think, in the Earthsea.
Yes, the Earthsea fantasies and such like. I mean, she's a brilliant writer per se, so she's written lots of essays and other things, but I really enjoyed those. I just thought they speak in lots of different ways, don't they? But as a young person, and I read it when I was I was an older teenager. I'm older, you know, but I just found them fascinating, and I just found her wordsmithing brilliant. She was a real inspiration. Yeah, great.
What drew you towards writing for children in particular and young people?
Sorry, Gemma, could you say that again?
What attracted you to writing for children and young people?
Well, I've got 2 children of my own who are all grown up, and one has, you know, a child. And I think it was really about my son, who is the youngest, Joshua, who has dyslexia and had it much more severely than myself. So he was unable to read for himself until he was into his teens. So I found myself having to find books to read. And we all as a family enjoyed reading together, always. And I would have done so anyway. But it was quite difficult finding books that inspired him and were a pleasure to read. Fortunately, J.K. Rowling came along at the right time, and I am very proud to say I read every word of every one of her books before Stephen Fry, which took some doing. But to be quite honest, you know, at that particular point in time, there weren't that many inspiring books out there. And I thought, well, if ever I'm going to write something, I want it to be something that young people and children will enjoy reading, but parents will as well, so that you can give the voice to it, and there's short chapters. There's nothing worse, I think, for a parent or a child to look at a book and think, 12 pages? I've really got to read this? Whereas if it's 3 or 4, it's manageable. So, you know, that was the thinking. It's quite seriously behind when I sat down and started to write the book. So, you know, that helps.
Absolutely. I was a bookseller at the time that the first Harry Potter books came out. Do you think that they made it easier for children's authors to be taken seriously and to get published?
Yes, yeah, I do. I think in some ways it made it easier to write in different ways, because before that it was very dogmatic about what you wrote for children. I think J.K. Rowling opened that up quite significantly. She wasn't afraid to experiment with her characters. I'm not saying I enjoy every single thing she writes, but within her books there's some excellent characters and characterizations. It made it more difficult because she was so popular. So other writers who are equally good didn't stand a chance. So it's very difficult for me as an independent author and publisher. If JK is putting out a new book, you know, why am I going to bother? Because nobody of that age group is necessarily going to buy my book at the time. So, and it's not just JK, it's Philip Pullman, it's all the big names, David Walliams. It's very hard for independent authors and small publishers to publish their, to promote their books when there are these big publishing houses throwing masses of money, etc., at their authors. And, so be it. But it's my choice to go as an independent, and it's something that I stand by. But yeah, it swings and roundabouts. But no, I'm not going to knock what JK did.
No.
Or Philip Pullman, all the rest that followed.
They open the door for children reading, don't they? So children who may not have been interested in, they open the door for children's reading. So children who may not have been interested in reading suddenly are looking for more books, looking for new authors, looking for new adventures. in a way they
Yes.
wouldn't have done perhaps. I think that's the value there. You've got fantastic reviews on Amazon, I have to say. There's
Thank you.
5-star reviews, so congratulations on that. Do you find that helps
Thank you.
at all?
Oh, it's hugely important. A review, any review, is worth me selling 5 books. That's the difference it makes. I mean, a huge difference. I mean, it makes me feel good that somebody's taken the time, even if it's not a perfect review, it means somebody's taken the time to read the book and review it.
Mm-hmm.
And especially I do get reviews from children, and occasionally I get them through the post, and it's wonderful. You know, that sense of, oh, wow. I had one the other day, which was inspiring. I had a teacher from a school in Beccles in Lowestoft who bought Deadwood Hall, gosh, it must have been not long after it came out, and wrote to me on behalf of the class to say how much they enjoy reading it. They've read it, he's read it to 2 classes, and could I please send in some publicity? And I was 10 foot tall. You know, I felt wonderful. You know, that is just such a great sense of, you know, just a feeling that you can't knock at all. It's very hard work publicising it yourself. And of course, being in a pandemic, it's meant that I haven't been able to go to the schools, I haven't been able to go to the book fest, I haven't been able to come to your wonderful Scarborough and stand there. But next year, fingers crossed. You know, those things matter. And I really miss the interaction with children. You know, I go into schools and I spend a morning with a class and we write poetry together and such like. So I miss that a lot.
No, I appreciate that. So at the moment you have 2 series running, one for the under 10s and one for the slightly older children.
That's right.
And you've got plans to expand both the Bonus Seekers series?
Well, I'm thrilled to say that yesterday I was putting the finishing touches to book 3 of the Oozing Magic. So that's Deadwood Hall. So there's Deep Waters, which is the middle one. And I can now announce that the 3rd one is called Caverns Fall, which will be out, fingers crossed, in the end of October, because it's all about Halloween. So you're the first person to hear this.
Breaking news, fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, so it's going off to my editor, hopefully the end of next week. So the first draft is pretty much complete, so I now have to go through it with a fine tooth comb and hone it down, and then the work begins. So he looks at it, sends it back to me, and so the process goes on. But he puts illustrations in as well.
I was going to ask you about your illustrations because they're really quite wonderful.
Yes.
How do you collaborate with an illustrator to create the creatures that you have in your head onto the page?
Well, David Halewood is the illustrator, and he also creates comics. And he's the most amazing guy. I'm so fortunate to find him, and it was serendipity, essentially, that we found each other. He was just leaving his computer work and had set up as a freelance. So it was perfect timing. And he liked my books and had agreed to help edit and agreed to do the illustration. So I write the book, and I sent him a summary for Caverns Fall. And he is right now busy illustrating, putting ideas together. So I don't know what my characters will look like until he sends them. And it works brilliantly. And so far, there hasn't been a single thing that he's done that I haven't liked. You know how sometimes you just connect?
Yes.
It's one of those wonderful relationships, and that we've never met apart from online.
That's incredible.
But he's a great writer himself. He's written for the BBC and ITV, but his comics are fantastic. And as I said, I'm very, very proud that he's illustrating my book. So long may it last.
They look absolutely beautiful, I have to say. They're amazing.
Yeah, the colour. I've got colour. I usually produce bookmarks with the colour illustrations. So I take those into schools, and I can provide them. Mm-hmm. But I can't put them in the books as colour because it costs too much money. It would mean me selling them for about £14.
Right. Okay. Yes. No. A little bit much. But the cover and the back give you a very good idea. And I love the fact that some of your characters appear on your website, so you get a sense of
Yes,
personality
yeah, enjoyed it.
there as well. So that's wonderful. I love the fact that you go into schools and engage with children. I think that's wonderful, and
Yes.
inspiring the next generation, hopefully, of keen readers and the generation after
Hopefully.
that. You say that the themes in your books are often danger and friendship are very close partners. So, do you like to have a lot of thrill in your books? A lot of Do you like to have a lot of thrill in your books, a lot of adventure and dynamic?
Oh, a lot of thrill.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think to keep young people engaged, it's about movement. And I'm not writing a book about bullying, or I'm not writing. I might touch on it and have touched on it in the second book, but I am talking fantasy and I am talking magic. But within that, I'm also talking brother and sister and friendship, and how those relationships work. I lived with two children, within they're sort of 2-3 years apart, and they didn't always get on. Even that, they don't always get on, and I'm sure parents will recognise that, the arguments and the pushing and the shoving, and what it's like to be an older sister or a younger brother. So that is definitely shown in the books. I think it's important within the book that it's the children who lead the story and not the adults. But you do need some adult input to push the story forward. And it's about that balance, trying to find that balance. But I don't have a problem throwing children into adventure and danger, as long as I can show them in a realistic way getting out of it. But I am also using magic. And for Dylan and Emily, without giving the spoilers, magic plays quite a big part in this.
Brilliant. Okay.
But also common sense, they have to use their common sense.
Absolutely. Is there a particular part of the writing process that you enjoy the most?
There's a couple of bits really. I love the planning stage when the ideas are just coming and I'm just starting out, and that's really exciting. And yesterday, I suppose, this part where I'm almost complete, and there's the renewed enthusiasm to get it finished, to go back to the beginning, to refine it, and to make sure it's as good as it possibly can be. The worst part, there are two worst parts, is when you're doing the sludge, essentially, and you're sort of a quarter of the way through and you're thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. And you've written a chapter, you're thinking, that's too slow. I need to change that. And the second worst part is when you're finished. Because there's all the excitement, everything, and you haven't started the next project. And it's a real downer for a while, not for long, but it does fall flat for a while. And it's happened with every one of my books. So, and I've talked to other writers, and they all say a very similar thing. That after the euphoria, you do get this sort of drop off, because it's very exciting, and it happens with lots of other things, doesn't it? If you've got something exciting happening, and then the day after you're like, oh, what am I going to do?
It's like drop off after Christmas, isn't it? When you New Year, February, January and February. And do you have a particular favourite character you've created?
I quite like some of the smaller characters. So in this particular series of books, there's a character in the second book who's called an Aquelsis. And they appear in the third book, again, without giving spoilers. And I've really grown to like that character because they're really quirky and they cause a lot of chaos and they're very funny. You have to wait and see. So I quite like the smaller characters that they're not in there a lot, but you can make them funny. So I quite like funny characters. And in the older series of books, which are no magic in there, they are quirky. And again, I can't really say too much without giving it away. But again, the secondary characters, although the main character is a boy, one of the secondary characters is Lucy, who's a very strong girl, and she's really up there, and she's quite prepared to jump in and you know, get her hands dirty, and she's not afraid of anything or anybody. So I've really enjoyed writing her, and she's in all of the books and in, you know, will be throughout the series. So it's again about the balance of those characters, and adults play some part in the older series, but again, it's about a group of teenagers who are growing together and having to deal with, you know, really weird circumstances, but also very normal circumstances about being bullied at school, and about, you know, dealing with idiots, and, you know, when they start messing about, etc. And how do you deal with that? So yeah, so I enjoy that side of the writing and the characterization.
Wonderful. So I was wondering, Linda, would you be willing to share a few tips and ideas that maybe our aspiring writers could pick up on?
I certainly can. I think the main tip is just write. You don't have to write for anybody, just write for yourself. Just get a notepad, a piece of paper or a pen. You don't have to be a brilliant speller. You don't have to be brilliant at grammar. Just write the ideas in your head. It can be absolutely anything. So maybe you're sitting in your garden and you see a bumblebee fly down and sit on a flower, write about the flower and the bumblebee. It could be that you're into space. Just imagine sitting there at night and watching a shooting star, or imagine something coming down. If you're lying in bed, you could write that down. And just anything, just create something, write a few words and see if you can't turn it into a short story. Or maybe you're into poetry. Sometimes when I get stuck in my books, I just leave them and I think about writing some poetry. And I have written a few poems. I'm not the greatest poet in the world, but it just helps to free up the thoughts and to free up other bits and pieces. And another really important tip is to read. So read other people's work and enjoy it. Think about, you know, how they write. Think about how they make a character interesting, or maybe how they don't make it interesting and decide not to do it like that. That's just as important. And talk to other people about books. And obviously for, you know, older young people, there's Facebook, and there's, you know, the internet. But I'm aware that for lots of young people, though, you know, it's not really necessarily the place that you would go to. And at the moment, not being in school, that can make it more difficult because you haven't got your teachers and you haven't got your friends around you to be able to share the ideas with. But you can always post them. You know, there is such a thing as snail mail. So you could write a letter to somebody. You know, it might be outdated, but it's very underrated. So why not try it? You know, give it a go. It's all really good practice. But the main tip of all is just to write and not worry about it and enjoy it.
Excellent advice, Linda. Thank you very much for your time today. I'm sure our young viewers and their families are going to find a lot to enjoy in your video. Thank you so much, and take care. Good luck with the publication.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Wish you all the best. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And you, Gemma. Bye-bye.